if you've watched this show long enough, then you will know by now that I frequently use Ryan Grimm as a resource, as a source for the show. He's a great reporter, left wing reporter. For The Intercept, he once worked at TYT. I don't think that he's at TYT anymore, but he worked at TYT for TYT Investigates for a while. And he's just a great investigative reporter. Really appreciate his work. He does a lot of great work. But every once in a while, everyone has a bad take every once in a while. And Ryan came out with a horrendous take recently that I just wanted to call him out on, because we highlight him so much and we appreciate his work. But we also got to call out our peers in this way, to hold them accountable when they do, have these terrible takes like this, especially when it's white leftists, with terrible, essentially white supremacist takes. I got to call them out as a black leftist, because unfortunately here on the left, we don't have enough, black voices on the left, and stuff like this can often go just, brushed under a rug somewhere, and it's unfortunate and totally unchecked. And so I think that's the job of, the black left to really hold our white comrades to account on this. So let's take a look at going to take a look here at some recent comments by Ryan Grimm. So this was Ryan Grimm's tweet, November 15th. He says, "This isn't just toxic and hateful. It's also politically suicidal to sweepingly attack tens of millions of voters like this, really putting the evil in lesser of two evils." So he says it's not just toxic and hateful. It's also politically suicidal to attack tens of millions of voters like this. So let's see who he's referring to, the tens of millions of voters who are being attacked here. So this tweet he's referring to is from Tom Elliott, and says, amidst a lengthy MSNBC segment attacking white women, the Democracy Alliance's Julie Kohler says, quote, "White women have taken an active role in the maintenance of white supremacy. White women weaponize their identities against especially black men." So let's look at this awful, horrendous attack on white women. Let's look at this attack on white women, okay?
Was this overwhelming support for Donald Trump in the 2020 election a vote for Trump, or was it a vote against Biden-Harris, with the emphasis on Harris?
Well, I think that it's really the maintenance of the status quo is what it showed. Yeah. So white women have been voting, narrow majorities of white women or pluralities of white women have been voting for Republican candidates for the better part of 70 years. And I think one of the important things that we can hopefully take away from this election is that these are longstanding patterns that are unlikely to change. And so this idea that Molly mentioned earlier, that kind of white women are the better angels of white people. And because we experience sexism and misogyny, which we do, that we somehow are more aligned or more empathic towards the oppression that people of color, and particularly Black Americans, experience in this country. Like, that has been routinely discredited at every point throughout history. Not only have white women and majorities of white women voted Republican for the better part of 70 years, white women have taken an active role in the maintenance of white supremacy. And that has not changed over the course of generations. And so we still see those legacies today, whether it's Amy Cooper or the Permit Patties, or white women that have weaponized their identities against especially Black men who threaten their privilege. These are long-standing entrenched patterns. Now, the one point that Rachel just mentioned that I do think is worthwhile paying attention to, and that I do think sort of this exit poll data obscures, is that I think one incorrect takeaway from this election is that therefore we just wash our hands and say, okay, we're no longer speaking to white women. Like, they're going to do what they're going to do politically. Their interests are their interests, and there's no point. And actually, I think that's where kind of delving into the subgroups of white women, and particularly looking at those white college-educated women who did appear to swing this election, where there has been real infrastructure built post-2016 that is doing real organizing in communities. That's not just swooping in with some ads in the weeks before the election, but that is really using white women's networks in those communities to organize. That does appear to make a difference. And not only that, I think we have to look at the fact that for the better part of 40 years, we have had a vast right-wing organizing machine in this country that has explicitly targeted white women. And so the notion that kind of white women are just going to do this, I think, in a country that's so rooted in white supremacy, it probably is the default position. But it doesn't mean that we don't organize. And I think one of the takeaways is that we have to look at where that organizing happened and the difference that it made. And there are examples of that.
So that was Julie Calder there on attacking white women. And I'll show you a follow-up tweet of Ryan Grimm's here as well. Just something that he said that really, I think, drove this point for me, and really, I think, is what I want to react to here. So let me just show one other, just a tweet, one more tweet from this thread here, from Ryan Grimm. He says, so in response to this, he just said, would be much more accurate, empathetic, and politically pragmatic to say that for years, white supremacy drafted white women into its ranks in order to drive a wedge between them and other marginalized people whose interests they share. Draw people in, don't drive them away. So he says it would be more accurate, empathetic, and politically pragmatic to say that white supremacy drafted white women into its ranks. I don't know about y'all, but drafting implies an act where you don't voluntarily want to do something. It's the draft is what we do when we want to go, get a bunch of people to go off to war. We draft them into the army. They're not necessarily volunteering to go do it, but you draft them in because they qualify, and you are essentially forcing them into this situation that they don't want to really be a part of. And my response to this, and I try not to just quote my own tweets or anything like that too often, but my response to this was that white women weren't drafted into white supremacy. They co-founded it. All right. And we just need to make that clear, and we don't got to play these games. And I hate when this happens, because as a black man in particular. And I think that, what she said here was 100% accurate about white women weaponizing their identity as, against black men throughout history. And there's this notion that white women are, somehow are either, I don't like to play oppression Olympics, but if we got to play like black people are going to win, black men are going to win those oppression Olympics against white women. We've had more oppression. We faced more oppression in this country. They often point to you black men got to vote first. Well, for one, they were disenfranchised through myriad ways after they received the right to vote. But then shortly thereafter, white women were given the right to vote as a reaction to it. And it was white women, white suffragists, that pushed that movement, kept black women, marginalized in that movement, and fought in order to secure the vote for white women specifically, and that was in order to offset black men getting that vote. And we know, I don't got to go any further than Emmett Till. That's my rebuttal to anyone who says, oh, well, how can white women weaponize their identity against black men? Look at Emmett Till. He was accused of whistling at a white woman and ended up having his eyes gouged out, being beaten, tortured, and drowned, and having his, tied to some weights and thrown into the Tallahatchie River by a bunch of white supremacists, and who never faced any prosecution for that, and including the woman who later admitted to lying about that, and lying in order that, telling a lie that got this, this black boy, a black child, murdered. And it was later, told that it was believed that if he did whistle, he was whistling because it was a trick that was taught to his mother, because he had a really bad stutter, and he would sometimes whistle to warm up his vocal cords. So sometimes he had to whistle literally because he had a disability that he was suffering from. So this may have been a disabled black boy who was targeted specifically for his disability, and then beaten, tortured, and murdered. And that was the power of white women. We have all throughout history examples like this. And so I just found it really pathetic and frustrating to see this narrative of white women, oh, poor white women. Luckily, I will say in the comments, if you read through the comments here, they were very uplifting to see, including white women saying, listen, we don't need to be coddled. You don't need to try to take away our agency. we are responsible for white supremacy as well, and we don't need to, hide that fact.
So a couple points that I just want to chime in with. One, piggybacking off that last one, I feel like we're tiptoeing on some line of misogyny when we put this level of purity on women where they're not allowed to do wrong or evil, or like you said, you're taking agency away with them. They're full people. They are capable of bad acts. We don't have to excuse it every time, because at that point you're saying, oh, they're like, they're less, they're not capable. It's this weird, like, that purity bullshit that they try to espouse on white women. And another point that really steams me up is that they've always had this role, like you said. They co-authored this shit. When you look at what happened with the KKK, right? The men went out. Who stayed home? Who stayed home and washed those robes? Who stayed home and taught those kids that fucking racism when daddy was out? Because we know back then they were all about their gender roles, right? The dad went out. The mother's the one that teaches the family. So who passed down that racism, Karen? Huh, Karen? Who passed that racism down?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering. So don't sit here and tell me that you weren't absolutely goddamn active in it. When the busing happened in like South Boston, and you go back and you watch those videos, who was on the front line spinning and throwing rocks at the black people? Huh, Karen? You want to tell me who was out there?
Absolutely.
Who was all across? I've seen those documentaries. All right, and it wasn't just the dudes. It was the white women who led that pushback against the integration in the busing. So like, please, I got into arguments with friends' mothers over this shit. Damn it! So don't tell me that you didn't take an active role in this. Come on.
Yeah.
Not in a world where Emmett Till got killed. Nah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'm somebody, I was raised by a white woman, my mother's a white lady, and I'm telling you, this is my mama too. It's not just the Trumpists either, it's liberal white women as well that are propagators of white supremacy. It's there's overt racism. There's the, like, I want to lynch the N-words type of racism, but there's also a covert white supremacy that says, it's this constantly paternalistic, condescending, looking down to, telling us what we need, always assuming that what we want is to be more like them and to be indoctrinated into their ways, and assuming that we want to be like white people, and to try to, civilize us in that way, because they saw us as these savages and they wanted to civilize us into their ways, and they saw us this way. And white women were, as you said, it was in order to maintain the white patriarchy, it required the white male supremacist institutions required the assistance of white women to take care of the home, to do that vital work in the home, in order to allow those white men to go out there and to do their work, to destroy and damage, black and brown communities the way that they did. And also some white women participated much more directly. There were white women who were slave owners.
The Daughters of the Confederates. That was a whole ass organization that went on for a while, celebrating that shit.
Absolutely. And I'm not out here saying that black men are some perfect thing or anything like that, or like we don't got our whole own set of problems and patriarchy, and we are absolutely prone to patriarchy and those same tendencies, and we could talk about that for days. But to play this game and to to act as if white women aren't, as far as human beings go in this society, it's not that it's like white men, then black men, or white men, then Latino men, or Asian men, then black men, and then white women down here. Like, that's not how it goes. It's white men, white women, and then everybody else, and we can sit there and play games about who's after that or whatever, but it's 100% white men and then white women in this society. And white women are seen as the most precious beings in society. Everything that white supremacy does, it does in a attempt to try to protect white women, to shield white women, and to protect this precious thing.
Birth of a Nation. What did they put out there in Birth of a Nation when they were trying to show black men as savages? What was it? That they were going to go and they were going to come for their women. You know, that was the whole thing. They showed the dude in blackface throw the white woman over his shoulder with the wild eyes and run off into the bushes. So
Yep, those
like
are the savages that they saw and sought to like tame the savages. And you can look up in history books. I wish I had grabbed the reference. There was, in that thread, with Ryan Grimm's thread, people responded with references to history books that talked about this very phenomenon of white women, throughout history being responsible, being, agents of white supremacy. And again, it's not just the Trumpists that they talked about in this video, because there was a slightly, like elitist tone to it, where it was essentially talking about college educated white women acting as if they were exempt from this issue, when the reality is that they are just as prone to these white supremacist tendencies as the uneducated or high school educated poorer white women. So and even more so in many cases of that sort of paternalistic, condescendingly looking down at and determining what's best for black people in this country. And so I see a lot of that even in left spaces and liberal spaces that I occupy. I see a lot of that.
Or the fetishization. I remember the George Floyd protests, seeing the signs from, oh my God, the "I'm just here to protect my BBC" and all that.
Yes. Oh, man, Tammy can't stand that. I can't stand it. It's so gross. It's so terrible. It's like gross. Literally like, oh, I just want to have my mixed kids. These white women standing out there during the George Floyd protests with signs like, "I'm just here to protect my brown babies or my mixed babies." Or like, I just want to. So it's gross. It's like, it is fetishization. Racial fetishization.
It's on both sides. Yup.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Women are just as capable of a different type of racism, but it's still the same. It's still racism and white supremacy.
And to black men, we need to work. We need to do the work to start to unlearn some of this shit. And these having like Eurocentric beauty standards, upholding white women in a certain way. I know many black men who have torn down black and brown women to uplift white women, to say, oh, white women are so much better than black women for this, that, and the next thing. And that's disgusting. And we got to talk about that too. And we should always bring that up as black men, to acknowledge that does happen and that is a problem that we have to stamp out. And we do work, and and I know Kwame, I follow Kwame on all different platforms. I know Kwame does the work.
Especially because I used to be that dude. I used to be that dude that was curving dark-skinned women and shit-talking them in chasing those beauty standards, and that's it was terrible, reprehensible that I did it, and that's why I will never let up, and I will stay keeping the pressure on black men to move forward past that, because we have to do better.
Absolutely.
On so many issues.
Absolutely.